I've talked so many times about how people need to read science when it comes to diet and nutrition. And in science, there actually has to be an experiment. So that hand is pointing to the part of the science where you do an experiment. Before that, you have a hypothesis. After that, you analyze data and then report it, and then other people replicate it. When you don't look at science and you're only looking at surveys, which is what the federal government does, and dietetics and nutrition, etc., they're looking at surveys. You get some failures. Here are some spectacular failures in epidemiology. These policies by the federal government had to be reversed, and they had to do with antioxidant vitamins. Antioxidants are not good for human health. There's caps on dietary cholesterol because at one point, according to the surveys, they told us that cholesterol is bad, so therefore eat less. But they removed that because the science reversed that. The idea that fat causes cancer, there's actually no science that shows that animal fat causes cancer. And then hormone replacement therapy was a thing for a long time. And then they did the women's health trial, and they reversed that. Back to nutrition, you can see that Americans are doing exactly what the USDA is telling them to do. And we see that there's an increase in fresh vegetables in our diet, fruits, grains, and vegetable oils. And what's gone down since 1970 is red meat, whole milk, eggs, animal fats, and butter. I've seen vegetarian/Mediterranean diet doctors say the opposite. They lie and they say that we're not following the USDA and we're eating more red meat. It's not true. This graph proves that we're eating less meat and we're eating more grains and vegetable oils, and that's why 70% of Americans are overweight. This is an amazing graphic. It's 116 feeding studies all combined, and it's not surveys. This is actually clinical trials where they do science, and let's walk through this. So on the far left, we have red. That is junk food eaters and fast food eaters, and they're eating the most amount of calories per day, and you'll see this as I compare the other dietary groups. Now, the key here is at the bottom, the protein percent. So the junk food eaters are eating about 5 up to 10% of their diet is in protein. And that's the main problem, is they're not eating enough protein. Now we have at the bottom in the yellow, there's like a rectangle sort of shape, and that is the Mediterranean diet, which is 10% protein. And you can say that's also the zone diet. That's also the vegetarian diet. It's a lot of different diets. It's all low fat. Now, the USDA has 3 different dietary patterns that they're studying. Not one of them is low carb. Not one of them is keto. Not one of them is carnivore diet. They're here. They are the US style DASH diet. It's low sodium, low fat diet. And then the Mediterranean diet and the vegetarian diet. And you can see basically they're all the same percentage of protein, 18%, 18%, and 16%. And then low fat, and then high carbohydrate. This is a high sugar diet. So 52 to 56% of the calories are coming from carbohydrates. This is the reason why 70% of Americans are overweight, and we have a heart disease epidemic and an obesity epidemic and a cancer epidemic. The government is the cause of our current health crisis. It is solely on the government, and you can't blame any private organization, some corporation. You can't blame some school lunch lady. It's the government, because they set the mandate, and then the military mess halls and the school lunch supply, food supply across the country, the food manufacturers, they all just follow the mandates. Okay, back to this graph. We have in the yellow, that's the government mandates right there. And then in the blue, we have more of a protein consumption as a percentage of the total calories for the day. This is low carb, so it's higher fat. Notice that this A stands for Atkins and the P stands for Protein Power, which is a book by Dr. Michael Eads. We're at 55 to 60% of the calories per day coming from fat. And then the protein percent is right here at 35%. And that's a really good diet. The carbohydrates are very low. And this is better than the government mandates, vegetarian, zone diet, DASH diet, Mediterranean diet, low fat, high fiber, high carb. The low carb diet is the best diet when you look at these 3 diets so far. But we have the fitness bros on Instagram. We have the fitness models, girls on Instagram, and they have it better than everybody else because they're over here to the far right. They reduce their carbs and their fat because carbs and fat are total energy combined. They're both energy, and they have a maximum percentage of protein in their diet. At 45 to 55% of their calories come from protein right here. So thank God for Instagram and the bro scientists, because they're the ones that have it right. Now, these different diets are therapeutic depending on the person. So somebody who is hungry all the time, then they need the low carb diet, higher fat. And to get into ketosis, you do either high fat, low carb, or you can do the fitness diet on the far right. And you can get into ketosis as long as your carbohydrates are less than 20 grams a day. But what the lesson here is that the low carb diet is the better diet of the traditional diets that we've been talking about for like the last 30 years. But then we got the fitness people, and they are more correct. Another drawback of the high fat diet is that some people have no gallbladder, or they get bloated when they eat fat, or it's just not as satisfying when you just eat fat and protein, because then you need some carbohydrates. And I've been there, and I've been primarily low carb since 1999, keto since 2015, and carnivore since 2018. But there's times when I need fruit. And people on Twitter told me, hey, you don't need any fruit. You don't need any carbohydrates. I'm like, okay, great. Thanks for that information. But I need fruit sometimes. And in 2019, when I was very hardcore carnivore, I had fruit once a month. And now I have a little bit more often. But that's just how it goes. You just have to figure out what your body wants. So keep this in mind. If you eat the yellow section, the government mandate, it'll drive you to eat junk food. And then when you eat low carb, you can avoid all the yellow and all the red, and you're eating higher fat or lower fat. It's up to you. It's still low carb. So this whole blue section is low carb. So to summarize, the junk food, ultra processed fast food is here on the left, and people eat the most amount of calories. They eat 2,750 calories per day. The yellow is the official government mandates, recommendations, and they eat 2,100 calories per day. The blue up here, the low carb, eat 1,400 calories per day. And then the blue here, the fitness athletes, they're at 1,100 calories per day. And some of these studies are short-term, some are longer, but the point is 116 actual clinical experiments. So can somebody live on 1,100 calories per day for a long period of time? I have had people eat between 600 and 1,100 calories per day because they're on a low-carb diet, and they're just not very hungry because they're eating high-quality meat with plenty of fat and protein, and they're very happy with that, and it lasts for many, many months. So you can do low calorie like this for a long time, but they're not forcing it. It's how their body responds to their diet. So if you're eating low carb and you want to eat lower fat to get more into that fitness diet, then just eat leaner steaks. So top sirloin, for example, or filet, and avoid the ribeyes. Or if you crave some fat, sometimes maybe every 4 days or once a week, eat a big fatty steak. But then you're heading more towards leaner meat such as fish, chicken, turkey. And notice how your appetite changes. And maybe you're less hungry, maybe you're more hungry, but you can add in some vegetables, a little bit of plants, and that can really drastically change your appetite and make it happier. So you can go longer potentially when you're eating the leaner meats.